She held the book in her hands like it was nothing. Just an old thing with a faded cover, pages yellowed by time, edges soft from decades of neglect. She didn't know it yet, but she was holding the answer to everything she had been searching for. The answer to the emptiness she felt every morning when she woke up. The answer to the fear that followed her through every bill, every argument, every silent dinner with a husband who had become a stranger. She didn't know that in exactly 30 days, she would not recognize her own life. She didn't know that this book, written over 114 years ago by a man most people have never heard of, contained a secret so simple and so powerful that it would rearrange the very fabric of her existence. But she was about to find out. Her name was Margaret, and she was 43 years old. She lived in a small house in Ohio, the kind of house that looks exactly like every other house on the street. White walls, a modest yard, a car in the driveway that was always making some kind of noise it shouldn't make. She had a husband named David, 2 grown children who called once a month if she was lucky, and a job at a medical supplies company where she processed invoices 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. She had been doing this for 11 years. 11 years of the same fluorescent lights, the same keyboard, the same faces, the same silence on the drive home. Margaret was not unhappy in the way that makes people seek help. She was unhappy in the way that makes people stop noticing they are unhappy. It had become her normal. The low-grade dissatisfaction, the sense that life was happening somewhere else to someone else, the feeling that she had somehow missed a turn years ago and now she was just driving in circles, waiting for something she couldn't name. She didn't talk about it. There was nothing to say. This was just life. This was just what it meant to be a grown woman in America, with a mortgage, and a marriage, and a job that paid the bills most months. But there was something underneath all of it. A question she didn't dare ask out loud. A whisper that came to her late at night when David was snoring beside her, and the house was dark, and the world felt impossibly heavy. The question was this: is this really all there is? She pushed the question down every time it came. She told herself she was being ungrateful. She told herself that millions of people had it worse. She told herself to be realistic, to grow up, to stop dreaming like a child. And the question would retreat for a while, hiding in the corners of her mind, waiting for the next weak moment to resurface. It always did. The day everything changed started like every other day. It was a Saturday in late October, the sky gray and low, the air carrying that particular Midwestern cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. David was in the garage doing something with tools. Margaret was in the basement, sorting through boxes they had moved from house to house for 20 years without ever opening. She didn't even know why she was doing it. Some restless energy had taken hold of her that morning, a need to move, to do something, to feel like she had some control over something, even if it was just cardboard boxes full of forgotten things. Most of the boxes contained exactly what she expected: old clothes that no longer fit anyone, children's drawings from decades ago, tax documents from years that no longer mattered, broken appliances they had kept for reasons no one could remember. She moved through them mechanically, sorting things into piles. Keep, donate, throw away. It was mindless work, and she was grateful for it. And then she found the box. It was smaller than the others, tucked in the back corner behind a broken vacuum cleaner. It was sealed with tape that had turned brown and brittle with age. She didn't recognize it. She had no memory of packing it or moving it or ever seeing it before. She knelt on the cold concrete floor and pulled it toward her, her fingers working at the ancient tape until it gave way. Inside, there were things that must have belonged to her grandmother, a woman she barely remembered, who had passed when Margaret was still a child. There were photographs, a few pieces of costume jewelry, some letters in handwriting she couldn't read. And at the bottom, beneath everything else, there was a book. It was thin, barely more than 100 pages, with a dark cover that might have once been green but had faded to something closer to gray. The title was printed in simple letters, no flourishes, no promises of transformation or success. It just said, "The Science of Getting Rich." And below that, a name, Wallace D. Wattles. Margaret had never heard of Wallace D. Wattles. She had never heard of this book. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, which was almost nothing. She opened to the first page and saw that it had been published in 1910, 114 years ago. She almost laughed. What could a book from 1910 possibly have to say to her now, in this basement, in this life, in this moment? But something made her keep holding it. Something made her turn to the first chapter and read the first lines. And what she read there made her stop breathing for a moment. The words were simple and direct. There was no poetry, no elaborate philosophy, no religious language that she would have to decode. The author simply stated that there was a science to becoming rich, that it was an exact science like mathematics, and that anyone who learned and applied this science would inevitably become wealthy. He said it with such certainty, such calm conviction, that Margaret felt something stir in her chest. Not belief exactly, but curiosity. A door opening somewhere inside her that had been locked for a very long time. She sat on that cold basement floor for an hour, reading. She forgot about the boxes. She forgot about David in the garage. She forgot about everything except the words on those yellowed pages. The author talked about something he called the thinking substance, an intelligent energy that fills the universe and responds to human thought. He said that when a person holds a clear picture in their mind of what they want and holds it with faith and gratitude, this substance begins to move toward them, arranging circumstances and opportunities to bring that picture into physical form. It sounded impossible. It sounded like fantasy. But the way he explained it, step by step, with such logical precision, made her keep reading. He talked about the difference between competitive thinking and creative thinking. He said that most people fail because they are trying to take things away from others, competing for a limited supply of good. But the truly successful, he said, understand that they can create their own good through the power of their mind. They do not compete. They create. Margaret thought about her own life, about how she had always felt like she was competing for her husband's attention, competing for recognition at work, competing with her neighbors for some invisible standard of success that no one ever clearly defined. She had spent her whole life competing, and she had nothing to show for it except exhaustion and a basement full of boxes. The author went on to talk about gratitude. He said it was the essential first step, the thing that connected a person to the source of all good. Not gratitude as an afterthought, not gratitude when things go well, but gratitude now in advance, for the things that are coming. Gratitude as a state of being. Gratitude as a magnet that draws good things toward you. Margaret thought about the last time she had felt genuinely grateful. She couldn't remember. She could remember plenty of times she had said thank you, plenty of times she had gone through the motions. But real gratitude, the kind that fills your whole body and makes you feel connected to something larger than yourself, she couldn't recall the last time she had felt that. She kept reading. The author talked about faith, not religious faith exactly, but a deep knowing that what you have asked for is already on its way. He said that doubt and fear were the enemies of this faith, that they disrupted the connection between the human mind and the thinking substance, causing the things you want to move away from you instead of toward you. He said you must think in a certain way, and you must act in a certain way. And when you do both of these things consistently, you cannot fail. By the time David called down to ask if she wanted lunch, Margaret had finished the entire book. She climbed the stairs in a daze, the thin volume still in her hand. She felt like she had just woken up from a long sleep. She felt like she had just discovered a door in a room she had lived in her whole life, a door she had never noticed before, and she had no idea where it led. That night she made a decision. She would read the book again. She would read it every single day for 30 days. Not skimming, not rushing, but really reading it, absorbing every word, letting the ideas sink into her mind until they became part of her. She didn't know why 30 days. It just felt right. Enough time to really give it a chance. Enough time to see if this strange old book had any power at all, or if it was just wishful thinking from another century. She told no one about her experiment. Not David, who would have looked at her with that patient expression that meant he thought she was being foolish. Not her sister, who would have laughed and made some comment about midlife crises. Not her co-workers, who would have nodded politely and changed the subject. This was hers, this secret, this possibility. She would protect it until she knew if it was real. Day 1 felt like nothing. She woke up early, before David, and sat in the kitchen with the book and a cup of coffee. She read slowly, taking her time with each paragraph, trying to really understand what Wattles was saying. The words felt different now, reading them for the second time. More urgent, more personal. When she finished, she closed the book and sat in the silence of the early morning, trying to feel something. She felt nothing, just the same tiredness, the same gray weight of her ordinary life. Day 2 was the same, and day 3. She read the book each morning, trying to apply what she was learning. She tried to feel grateful. She tried to hold a clear picture in her mind of what she wanted, though she realized she didn't even know what that was. What did she want? Money? She supposed so. Everyone wants money. But that felt too vague, too empty. She wanted something else, something she couldn't name. She wanted to feel alive again. She wanted to feel like her life mattered. She wanted to wake up excited about something. Anything. By day 7, she was ready to quit. Nothing had changed. She still felt the same. The world still looked the same. She went to work, processed invoices, came home, made dinner, watched television, went to sleep. The book's promises felt hollow now, like a cruel joke played on desperate people. She thought about her grandmother, who must have read this same book, who must have believed in it enough to keep it all these years. And what had it gotten her? A small life, an early passing, a box of forgotten things in a basement. But something made Margaret pick up the book again on day 8. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the fact that she had committed to 30 days, and she had never broken a commitment in her life. Maybe it was something else, something deeper, a voice inside her that said, "Keep going." Whatever it was, she read the book again that morning, and something shifted. It was a small shift, barely noticeable. A sentence she had read 7 times before suddenly landed differently. Wattles wrote that you must begin to act now on what you have. Not wait until circumstances change. Not wait until you feel ready. Act now, where you are, with what you have. Do everything you do in a certain way, he said. Do it with the full intention of advancement, with the faith that you are moving toward what you want, even if you cannot see the path. Margaret thought about how she had been waiting her entire life, waiting for the kids to grow up, waiting for the mortgage to be paid off, waiting for David to change, waiting for some magical moment when everything would click into place and she could finally start living. But that moment never came. It never comes. Because waiting is not living. Waiting is just another form of giving up. That day, Margaret did something she had not done in years. She took a different route to work. It was a small thing. Meaningless, really. But it felt significant. She drove past streets she had never seen, past houses and shops and lives she knew nothing about. The world was bigger than her usual route. The world was bigger than her usual thoughts. This was what Wattles meant by acting in a certain way. Not grand gestures, just small movements in the direction of expansion instead of contraction. At work, she did something else unusual. When her supervisor asked for someone to take on an extra project, Margaret raised her hand. She never raised her hand. She always kept her head down, did her work, avoided attention. But today, something in her said yes. Say yes to life. Say yes to opportunity. Say yes even when you don't know where it leads. Her supervisor looked surprised but pleased. The project was nothing special, just organizing a new filing system, but it meant working with people from other departments, people Margaret had never spoken to. It meant being visible. It meant stepping out of the invisible box she had built around herself. That night, she read the book again before bed instead of in the morning. She wanted the ideas fresh in her mind as she fell asleep. Wattles wrote about the importance of thinking only about what you want, never about what you don't want. He said that whatever you focus on expands. If you focus on lack, you get more lack. If you focus on abundance, you get more abundance. It was so simple, and yet Margaret realized she had spent her entire life focusing on lack. Not enough money, not enough time, not enough love, not enough of anything. Her mind was a catalog of everything that was missing, and she had never once stopped to consider what might happen if she turned her attention to what was present, to what was possible, to what was coming. She fell asleep that night with a strange feeling in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it because it had been so long since she had felt it. It was hope. Day 9 began differently. Margaret woke before her alarm, which almost never happened. She lay in the darkness for a moment, listening to David's steady breathing beside her, and she realized something strange. She was looking forward to the day, not dreading it, not bracing herself for it, but actually anticipating it. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt that way about a regular Monday morning. She made her coffee and sat with the book as the sun came up. The words were becoming familiar now, like an old song she was learning to sing. But familiarity didn't make them less powerful. If anything, each reading revealed something new, some layer of meaning she had missed before. Today, a passage about the creative mind caught her attention. Wattles wrote that the creative mind is never in a hurry, never anxious, never worried about results. It simply holds its vision with calm certainty, knowing that what it has asked for must come. Margaret thought about her own mind, how it was always racing, always jumping from worry to worry like a bird that can't find a place to land. She worried about money. She worried about her children. She worried about growing older, about her health, about whether David still loved her, about whether she had wasted her life. Her mind was a factory of worry, running 24 hours a day, producing nothing but exhaustion. What if she could stop? What if she could simply decide to think differently? It seemed impossible, like asking water to flow uphill. But Wattles insisted it was possible. He said the mind could be trained like any other faculty. It required practice, discipline, and above all, a clear picture of what you wanted held firmly in place against the tide of doubt and fear. That morning, Margaret tried something new. After reading, she closed her eyes and attempted to form a clear picture of what she wanted. Not vague wishes, but a specific image. She saw herself happy. Really happy, not the fake smile she wore at family gatherings, but genuine joy that came from somewhere deep inside. She saw herself financially free, not worried about every purchase, not calculating every expense. She saw herself in a marriage that felt alive again, with real conversations and real connection. She saw herself doing work that mattered, work that used her mind and her heart, not just her ability to type numbers into a computer. The picture was hazy at first, like a television with bad reception. Her mind kept interrupting with objections. That's not realistic. You're too old to change. David will never change. You don't have the skills to do anything else. The voices were loud and insistent, and they had been running her life for as long as she could remember. But today, she didn't let them win. She kept bringing her attention back to the picture, sharpening the details, adding color and texture. She imagined the feeling of waking up excited. She imagined the feeling of looking at her bank account without fear. She imagined the feeling of David's hand in hers, the way it used to feel 20 years ago when they were young and in love and the future was an open door. She held the picture for 5 minutes, then 10. When she opened her eyes, she felt different, lighter somehow, as if something heavy had been lifted from her shoulders, even if just for a moment. The project at work turned out to be more interesting than she expected. The new filing system required her to interview people from different departments, to understand what they needed, to design something that would work for everyone. It was the most engaged she had felt at work in years. People started to notice her. They stopped her in the hallway to ask questions, to share ideas, to thank her for listening. She was becoming visible in a place where she had been invisible for over a decade. On day 12, something unexpected happened. Her supervisor called her into his office. Margaret felt her stomach drop, the old fear response kicking in automatically. She ran through every possible mistake she might have made, every rule she might have broken. But when she sat down across from him, he was smiling. He told her that the work she was doing on the filing project had impressed the department heads. They were thinking about expanding it across the entire company, and they wanted her to lead it. It would mean more responsibility, more visibility, and a significant raise. Margaret heard herself say yes before she had time to think about it. The old Margaret would have hesitated, would have listed all the reasons she wasn't qualified, would have asked for time to think it over. But the new Margaret, the one who had been reading that book every day for almost 2 weeks, said yes. She said yes because Wattles taught her that when opportunity comes, you must act. You cannot hesitate. You cannot let fear make your decisions. That night, she told David about the promotion. She expected him to be pleased, or at least mildly interested. Instead, he looked up from the television and said something that surprised her. He said he had noticed she seemed different lately. Happier, more alive. He asked what was going on. It was the first real question he had asked her in months, maybe years. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from something else entirely. She told him about the book. She expected him to laugh or dismiss her, but he didn't. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked if he could read it when she was done with her 30 days. Something cracked open between them that night. They talked for hours, longer than they had talked in years. They talked about their children, about their marriage, about the dreams they had when they were young and the compromises they had made along the way. They talked about fear and hope, and what it might mean to really live instead of just existing. When they finally went to bed, David reached for her hand in the darkness, and she held it. Day 15 was the halfway point. Margaret marked it in her mind like a milestone on a long journey. She had read the book 15 times now. The words had begun to feel less like information and more like programming, as if they were rewriting something deep in her mind, replacing old code with new instructions. She noticed changes everywhere. At work, people treated her differently. They sought her opinion. They included her in meetings she had never been invited to before. The filing project was expanding faster than anyone expected, and her name was attached to its success. She was no longer invisible. At home, things were shifting too. David had started reading articles about starting a business, something he had talked about 20 years ago and then abandoned. He showed them to Margaret at dinner, asking what she thought. They were dreaming together again, which was something she thought they had forgotten how to do. But the biggest change was internal. Margaret was thinking differently. She caught herself in moments of worry and actively redirected her thoughts toward what she wanted instead of what she feared. It wasn't easy. The old patterns were strong, grooved into her brain by decades of repetition. But each time she caught herself and redirected, it got a little easier. The groove was filling in, and a new path was forming. She also noticed that she was feeling grateful more often. Not forcing it, not going through the motions, but genuinely feeling it. Grateful for the morning light coming through the kitchen window. Grateful for the coffee in her hands. Grateful for David's renewed interest in life. Grateful for the book that had started all of this. Gratitude was becoming her default setting, and as it did, more things appeared to be grateful for. On day 17, Margaret received a phone call that would have destroyed her a month ago. Her son called to say he had lost his job. He was upset, scared, asking if he could borrow money to cover his rent. The old Margaret would have immediately gone into panic mode. She would have worried about her own finances, about enabling him, about what this meant for his future. She would have spent days unable to sleep, imagining worst-case scenarios. But the new Margaret responded differently. She listened calmly. She told him she loved him and believed in him. She said yes, she would help with the rent, but more importantly, she asked him what he really wanted to do. Not what job he wanted to get, but what kind of life he wanted to create. It was a question she had never asked him before. It was a question she had never asked herself before, not until that book came into her life. Her son was quiet for a long moment. Then he started talking, really talking, about dreams he had never shared with her. Dreams of starting his own business, of working for himself, of building something meaningful instead of just collecting a paycheck. Margaret listened and she recognized herself in his words. The same longing, the same fear, the same sense that there must be something more than this. She told him about the book. She told him about her experiment. She expected him to be skeptical, as she had been at first. Instead, he asked her to send him a copy. She ordered one that night, and when she did, she noticed something strange. The book was a bestseller. It had been a bestseller for over 100 years. Millions of people had read it. and yet somehow she had never heard of it until she found it in that basement box. Wattles wrote about this phenomenon. He said that the truth is always available, but people only find it when they are ready. The book had been waiting for Margaret her entire life. It was waiting in that basement for decades, through moves and marriages and children growing up and leaving. It was waiting for the exact moment when she was desperate enough to try something new, open enough to receive something old. Day 20 brought another shift. Margaret was in a meeting about the filing project, presenting her ideas to the senior leadership team. She had never presented to executives before. The old Margaret would have been terrified, stumbling over her words, apologizing for taking their time. But the new Margaret stood at the front of the room and spoke clearly, confidently, as if she belonged there. Because she did belong there. She had always belonged there. She just hadn't known it. After the meeting, the company's chief operations officer stopped her in the hallway. She said she had been watching Margaret's work over the past few weeks, and she was impressed. She asked if Margaret had ever considered moving into management. There was a position opening up, overseeing operations for the entire regional office. It would be a significant jump, more money than Margaret had ever made, more responsibility than she had ever held. The executive wanted to know if Margaret would be interested in being considered. Margaret said yes without hesitation. And as she walked back to her desk, she felt something shifting in the universe around her. It was exactly as Wattles had described. When you think in the certain way, when you act in the certain way, opportunities begin to find you. You don't have to chase them. They come to you, drawn by the magnetic power of your clear intention and your unwavering faith. That evening, Margaret calculated something she had never calculated before. If she got this management position, combined with the raises she had already received, her income would nearly double within a few months. Not through luck, not through inheritance, not through any external windfall. Through her own transformation, through the change in her mind that had changed everything else. She thought about Wattles, about who he was and how he came to write this book. She had done some research during her lunch breaks. Wallace D. Wattles was not a wealthy man when he wrote The Science of Getting Rich. He was a poor man from the Midwest who had spent years studying philosophy and religion, trying to understand the laws that govern success and failure. He wrote the book not from a place of achievement, but from a place of understanding. He saw the principles clearly, and he wrote them down so others could see them too. He passed not long after the book was published, never seeing its full impact. But his words lived on, passing from hand to hand, generation to generation, finding their way to anyone who was ready to receive them. Finding their way to a basement in Ohio, to a woman who had given up on her dreams, to a moment of desperation that became a moment of transformation. Margaret felt connected to something larger than herself, to Wattles, to her grandmother, to everyone who had ever read these words and felt them come alive. She was part of a chain that stretched back over a century, and now she was adding her own link. Whatever she created from here forward would be her contribution, her gift to the chain, her proof that the principles were real and they worked. Day 23 brought a surprise she could never have anticipated. David came home from work with a strange look on his face. He sat down at the kitchen table and told Margaret that he had done something impulsive, something unlike him. He had put in his resignation at the company where he had worked for 18 years. Margaret felt her heart stop for a moment. This was David, the man who never took risks, who planned everything, who had spent their entire marriage being the sensible one. She asked what happened, what he was going to do. He told her about a conversation with an old friend, someone he had known in college who now ran a small construction company. The friend was looking for a partner, someone to help him expand. David had always loved building things, always dreamed of working with his hands instead of pushing papers. The opportunity had appeared out of nowhere, exactly when he was ready for it. He looked at Margaret with something she hadn't seen in his eyes for years. Excitement. Fear, too. But underneath the fear, a spark of life that had been dormant for so long she had forgotten it existed. She could have reacted with her own fear. She could have listed all the reasons this was a bad idea, all the ways it could fail, all the security they would be giving up. That's what the old Margaret would have done. But the new Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. She told him she believed in him. She told him she was proud of him for taking the risk. She told him they would figure it out together, whatever happened. That night, they made love for the first time in longer than either of them wanted to admit. It was different than before, not the routine physical release of a long marriage, but something new, something alive. They were becoming new people, and those new people were falling in love all over again. Day 25 arrived with a strange sense of acceleration, as if time itself had noticed the changes in Margaret's life and decided to move faster to keep up. She woke that morning with a clarity she had never experienced before. The fog that had surrounded her for years, that thick gray blanket of routine and resignation, had lifted completely. She could see her life now with sharp edges and vivid colors, and what she saw amazed her. In less than a month, everything had shifted. Her career was transforming, her marriage was reawakening, her relationship with her children was deepening, her financial situation was improving. But more than any of these external changes, something fundamental had shifted inside her. She thought differently now. She felt differently. She was becoming a different person, and that different person was creating a different life. She read the book that morning as she had every morning for the past 25 days. But now the words felt less like instruction and more like confirmation. She wasn't learning anymore. She was remembering. Remembering something she had always known but had forgotten somewhere along the way, buried under years of fear and doubt and other people's expectations. Wattles wrote about the formless substance that permeates all things, the intelligent energy from which everything in the universe is made. He said this substance is always moving toward more life, more expression, more creation. It cannot help itself. It is the nature of the universe to expand, to grow, to become more. And human beings, being part of this universe, share this same nature. We are built to grow. We are designed to create. When we align ourselves with this fundamental impulse of the universe, we become unstoppable. Margaret understood this now in a way she couldn't have understood a month ago. She had spent her whole life resisting growth, playing small, trying to fit into boxes that other people had built. She had contracted when she was meant to expand. She had competed when she was meant to create. She had focused on lack when abundance was all around her, waiting to be noticed. The shift from competitive to creative thinking was perhaps the most profound change she had experienced. Competitive thinking had been her default mode for as long as she could remember. She had grown up in a household where resources were scarce, where her parents fought about money, where the message was always that there wasn't enough to go around. She carried that scarcity into her adult life, into her marriage, into her career. She had always believed, without ever questioning it, that success meant taking something from someone else, that for her to win, someone else had to lose. But Wattles showed her another way. Creative thinking begins with the understanding that the universe is abundant, that there is more than enough for everyone, that your success does not diminish anyone else. When you operate from this mindset, you stop seeing other people as competitors and start seeing them as collaborators. You stop trying to get and start trying to give. You stop grasping and start creating. This shift had changed everything at work. Margaret was no longer trying to protect her territory, to hoard information, to make herself look good at others' expense. She was freely sharing her ideas, helping her colleagues succeed, celebrating their victories as if they were her own. And paradoxically, the more she gave, the more came back to her. The more she helped others rise, the higher she rose herself. The same principle was transforming her marriage. She had spent years keeping score, tallying up all the ways David had disappointed her, all the things he should have done, but didn't. She had been competing with him, trying to win arguments, trying to prove she was right. But when she shifted to creative thinking, she stopped keeping score. She started looking for ways to give, to appreciate, to build him up instead of tear him down. And David, feeling this change, had begun to open up in ways she hadn't seen since they were newlyweds. Day 26 brought another piece of the puzzle into place. Margaret was at work preparing for her interview for the management position when a thought struck her with the force of revelation. She had been so focused on what she was receiving that she had almost missed what she was meant to give. Wattles wrote extensively about the importance of giving more value than you receive. He said this was the key to sustainable success, the secret that separated those who achieved lasting wealth from those who grabbed money and lost it. Every transaction, every interaction, should leave the other person better off than they were before. This was not just ethical behavior. It was practical wisdom. When you consistently give more than you take, people want to do business with you. They want to work with you. They want to help you succeed because your success means more value for them. Margaret thought about her career, about all the years she had spent doing the minimum required to keep her job. She showed up, did her tasks, went home. She never asked how she could contribute more. She never looked for ways to add value beyond her job description. She had been operating in survival mode, just trying to get through each day without being noticed or criticized. But now she saw everything differently. The filing project that had launched her transformation hadn't come to her by accident. It had come because she raised her hand, because she said yes, because for the first time in years she had been willing to give more than was required of her. And that simple act of generosity had set in motion a chain of events that was reshaping her entire life. She made a decision that day. Whatever happened with the management position, she was going to approach her work differently from now on. She was going to look for problems she could solve, improvements she could make, value she could add. She was going to stop asking what her job could give her and start asking what she could give to her job. This shift in orientation from getting to giving felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The interview happened on day 27. Margaret walked into the conference room where 3 executives sat waiting, including the chief operations officer who had first suggested she apply. She felt calm, centered, completely present. There was no anxiety, no fear of judgment, no desperate need to impress. She simply knew who she was and what she could offer, and she trusted that the right outcome would unfold. The interview lasted an hour. They asked about her experience, her management philosophy, her vision for the role. Margaret answered each question from that place of calm certainty, sharing not just what she knew but who she had become. She talked about creative versus competitive thinking, about giving more value than you receive, about the importance of developing people rather than just managing tasks. She didn't mention the book explicitly, but its principles infused every word she spoke. When she left the conference room, she didn't know if she would get the position. But she knew something more important. She knew that she had shown up fully, had given her best, had held nothing back. Whatever happened next was out of her hands and in the hands of that intelligent universe Wattles wrote about, the one that always moves toward more life, more expression, more good. Day 28 brought news that didn't surprise her at all. She got the job. The chief operations officer called her personally to deliver the news, saying it had been a unanimous decision. They had never seen a candidate so clear about their vision, so confident without being arrogant, so focused on contribution rather than personal advancement. They wanted her to start in 2 weeks. Margaret hung up the phone and sat in her car in the parking lot for a long moment. She thought about where she had been just 4 weeks ago, invisible, defeated. Convinced that her life was over, that nothing would ever change, that she would process invoices until she retired and then wait quietly to fade away. And now, here she was, about to step into a role she never would have imagined possible, earning more money than she had ever dreamed of, living a life she hadn't dared to want. She thought about her grandmother, the woman who had kept that book all those years, who had believed in its principles enough to hold on to it through her whole life. Had her grandmother experienced something similar? Had she read the book and felt her life transform? Or had she read it and been unable to apply it, unable to break free from her own limitations, keeping the book as a reminder of what might have been? Margaret would never know. Her grandmother had passed too long ago, and there was no one left who could tell her the story. But she felt a connection to that woman she barely remembered, a gratitude that transcended the years between them. Her grandmother had kept the book, and in keeping it, had given Margaret the greatest gift imaginable, the gift of transformation, the gift of a new life. That night, Margaret and David celebrated. They opened a bottle of wine they had been saving for a special occasion, one of those bottles that sits in the rack year after year because no occasion ever seems special enough. But this was special enough. This was the beginning of everything new. They talked about the future with an excitement they hadn't felt in decades. David's partnership in the construction company was coming together faster than expected. His friend had clients lined up, projects waiting, more work than they could handle. David would be starting the next month, trading his office chair for a hard hat, his spreadsheets for blueprints. He was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Margaret told him about something she had been thinking about, something she hadn't shared with anyone yet. She wanted to teach what she had learned, not in any formal way, not starting a business or writing a book, but simply sharing the principles with people who were ready to hear them. She thought about her son, who had been reading Wattles and calling her with excited questions. She thought about her colleagues at work, so many of whom seemed as stuck as she had been. She thought about all the people walking around with that same gray fog she had lived in, not knowing that a simple book from 1910 could show them the way out. David looked at her with something like wonder. He said he barely recognized her, not in a bad way, but in an amazed way. She was the same person, but also completely different, more alive, more present, more herself than she had ever been. He said falling in love with her again was like discovering a treasure he had owned all along, but never knew how to value. Day 29 felt like the second-to-last chapter of a story she had been writing her whole life without knowing it. Margaret woke early again, eager to read the book one more time before her experiment officially ended. But this time, she didn't read it like a student studying for an exam. She read it like an old friend catching up after a long absence. The words were part of her now. They had woven themselves into the fabric of her thinking, changing the very structure of her mind. She thought about the science Wattles described, how precise he made it seem. Think in a certain way. Act in a certain way. Give more value than you receive. Hold your vision with faith and gratitude. These were not vague spiritual platitudes. They were specific instructions as practical as a recipe or a blueprint. Anyone could follow them. Anyone could achieve similar results. The principles were universal, available to anyone willing to learn and apply them. But she also understood now why most people never would. Not because the principles were secret or complex, but because they required something most people weren't willing to give. They required change, real change, deep change, the kind of change that feels like losing yourself before you find yourself again. Most people would rather stay comfortable in their misery than risk the discomfort of transformation. Margaret had been one of those people for 43 years. She had chosen comfort over growth, safety over possibility, the known over the unknown. And what had it gotten her? A life that felt like slow suffocation, a gradual dimming of everything bright and alive inside her. She had nearly run out of time. If she hadn't found that book in that basement on that particular Saturday, she might have spent the rest of her life in that gray fog, never knowing what was possible. But she had found it, or it had found her, or some intelligent force in the universe had arranged the meeting, knowing she was finally ready. However it happened, she was grateful. Grateful beyond words, beyond measure, beyond anything she could express. And that gratitude, Wattles taught, was itself a creative force, drawing even more good toward her, completing the circle of giving and receiving that powered the entire universe. That evening, Margaret did something she had never done before. She called her daughter, not waiting for the monthly check-in, not calling with news or questions, just calling to connect. Her daughter was surprised, but pleased. They talked for an hour, really talked, about life and dreams and fears and hopes. Margaret shared some of what she had learned over the past month, not preaching but simply offering, and her daughter listened with an openness that surprised them both. By the time she hung up, Margaret felt the circle expanding. The transformation that had begun in her was rippling outward, touching her husband, her son, now her daughter. Who knew how far it would spread? Who knew how many lives might be changed because she had decided to read a book every day for 30 days? Wattles wrote that when you get rich through creative thinking, you inspire others to do the same. Your success becomes a beacon, showing people what's possible, giving them permission to pursue their own dreams. This was the opposite of competitive thinking, where your success makes others feel diminished. Creative success lifts everyone. It expands the pie instead of fighting over slices. Margaret went to bed that night knowing that tomorrow would mark the end of her experiment. 30 days of reading the same book. 30 days of applying principles that were over a century old. 30 days that had changed everything, absolutely everything about her life. But it wasn't really the end. She understood that now. It was the beginning. The 30 days were just the foundation, the initial rewiring of her mind from competitive to creative, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to faith. The real work would continue for the rest of her life. Every day would bring new opportunities to think in the certain way, to act in the certain way, to give more than she received and trust the universe to respond. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, the book resting on her nightstand like a talisman, like a door to another world, like exactly what it was. A message from a man who had figured out the science of life and left instructions for anyone brave enough to follow them. Day 30 dawned like any other morning, but Margaret knew it was anything but ordinary. She lay in bed for a few moments before rising, feeling the weight of the milestone. 30 days. She had done it. She had read the same book every single day for an entire month, and in doing so, she had become someone she barely recognized. She made her coffee slowly, savoring the ritual that had become sacred to her over these weeks. The kitchen was quiet, the first light of morning filtering through the windows, and she felt a profound sense of peace. Not the empty peace of resignation, but the full peace of someone who has found their footing, who knows where they stand and where they are going. She opened the book one final time. The pages fell open easily now, the spine softened by 30 days of handling. She didn't need to read the words anymore. They lived inside her, woven into the fabric of her thoughts. But she read anyway, slowly, deliberately, honoring the practice that had transformed her life. Wattles wrote about the importance of continuous advancement, of never stopping, of always moving toward more life, more expression, more creation. He said that getting rich was not a destination but a journey, not an achievement, but a process. The moment you stop growing, you start declining. The moment you think you have arrived, you begin to fall behind. Life rewards movement, expansion, the constant reaching toward something greater. Margaret understood this now in a way she couldn't have understood 30 days ago. Her transformation wasn't complete. It would never be complete. She would spend the rest of her life learning these principles more deeply, applying them more consistently, discovering new dimensions of what was possible. The 30 days had been a beginning, not an ending, a door opening onto an infinite corridor of rooms she had never explored. She thought about what she had learned, trying to distill it down to its essence. The first principle was thought. Everything begins with thought. The images you hold in your mind, the beliefs you accept as true, the expectations you carry into each day, these invisible patterns shape everything visible in your life. Change your thoughts, and you change your world. Not metaphorically, but literally. The universe responds to thought the way a mirror responds to light. The second principle was faith. Not blind belief, but a deep knowing that what you have asked for is already on its way. Doubt is the enemy of faith, the static that disrupts the signal between your mind and the formless substance. When you doubt, you push away the very things you want. When you believe, truly believe with your whole being, you draw them toward you with irresistible force. The third principle was gratitude. This was perhaps the most surprising lesson of all. Margaret had always thought of gratitude as something you feel after you receive something good. But Wattles taught that gratitude must come first. You must be grateful in advance, grateful for things that haven't happened yet, grateful for the good that is coming even before you can see it. This kind of gratitude is not delusion. It is recognition. Recognition that the universe is fundamentally good, that it wants to give you what you want, that abundance is your birthright if you will only claim it. The fourth principle was action. All the thinking and believing and gratitude in the world mean nothing without action, but not just any action. Efficient action. Action taken in the certain way, with full presence and intention, giving more value than you receive in every transaction. Wattles was clear that you cannot think your way to wealth. You must act your way there. But the action must flow from the thought, must be aligned with the vision, must be taken with faith that each step is bringing you closer to your goal. The fifth principle was creation over competition. This was the principle that had changed Margaret most profoundly. She had spent her whole life competing, fighting for scraps, believing that the world was a zero-sum game where her gain meant someone else's loss. But creative thinking operates from an entirely different premise. It says that you can create your own good, that you don't need to take from anyone else, that your success can actually help others succeed. When you operate from this mindset, everything changes. Fear dissolves, generosity becomes natural, and paradoxically, you achieve more than you ever could through competition. Margaret closed the book and held it against her chest for a moment. She felt like she was saying goodbye to an old friend, even though she knew she would return to these pages again and again for the rest of her life. But this particular chapter, these 30 days, was ending. And she wanted to honor it properly before moving on. She thought about her grandmother again. She wished she could talk to her, could tell her what had happened, could thank her for keeping this book safe all those years. She wondered if her grandmother was somehow aware, if there was some part of her that knew her granddaughter had finally found the treasure she had been keeping. Margaret liked to think so. She liked to think that somewhere, in some dimension beyond this one, her grandmother was smiling. The rest of day 30 unfolded like a celebration. Margaret went to work and cleared out her old desk, preparing to move into her new office the following week. Her colleagues threw her a small party, something that never would have happened a month ago when she was invisible. She accepted their congratulations with grace, feeling genuinely happy for this new chapter without any of the old anxiety about whether she deserved it. David called her at lunch to share news of his own. He had signed the partnership papers that morning. It was official. He was now co-owner of a construction company, fulfilling a dream he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. His voice crackled with emotion, and Margaret felt tears running down her own cheeks as she listened. They were both being reborn at the same time, supporting each other through the terrifying, beautiful process of becoming who they were meant to be. That evening, the whole family gathered, not physically, but through video calls that linked Margaret and David with both of their children and, unexpectedly, their children's partners. Margaret's son had told his girlfriend about the book, and she had started reading it too. Her daughter's husband was curious about the principles Margaret had been sharing. What had started as a private experiment was becoming a family awakening. They talked for hours, sharing stories, asking questions, exploring ideas together. Margaret felt the circle continuing to expand, touching more lives, creating more ripples. This was what Wattles meant by inspiration. When you transform yourself, you give others permission to transform themselves. Your light illuminates their path. Your courage gives them courage. Your success proves that success is possible. Before they ended the call, Margaret's son asked her a question that stopped her in her tracks. He asked what she would say to someone who was just starting out, someone who had just found the book and was wondering if it was worth their time. What would she tell them? Margaret thought for a long moment before answering. She said she would tell them that the principles in the book are real. They work. They have been working for over 100 years, quietly changing lives, mostly in secret because the people who discover them often keep them to themselves. She would tell them that the transformation is not magic, but it can feel like magic when you experience it. It is science, the science of mind, the science of thought, the science of aligning yourself with the creative force that runs the universe. She would tell them to commit fully. Not to dabble, not to try it for a few days and give up when nothing seems to happen. Real change takes time. The mind resists new patterns. The old grooves are deep, and the new paths must be walked again and again before they become easy. 30 days is a good start, but it is only a start. The practice must continue for a lifetime. She would tell them to expect resistance. Not from the outside world, but from inside themselves. Their own mind will try to talk them out of it. Their own fear will manufacture reasons to quit. Their own comfort zone will pull at them like gravity, trying to bring them back to earth when they are learning to fly. This resistance is normal. It is part of the process. The only way through it is through it. She would tell them to find others who are on the same path. The journey is easier when you are not alone. Share the principles with people who are ready to hear them. Build a community of creative thinkers. Support each other through the hard parts and celebrate each other through the breakthroughs. And finally, She would tell them that they are worthy. This was perhaps the most important thing of all. So many people read books like this and cannot apply them because deep down they do not believe they deserve success. They feel fundamentally unworthy of abundance, of happiness, of a rich and full life. But Wattles taught that wanting to be rich is wanting to live fully, and living fully is your birthright. You do not need to earn it or prove yourself worthy of it. It is already yours. You only need to claim it. Her son thanked her, and Margaret could see in his eyes that something had shifted for him too. The conversation ended with promises to talk again soon, to keep sharing what they were learning, to support each other on this journey that none of them had expected to be taking. That night, Margaret and David sat together on their back porch, looking up at the stars. The air was cold, but they had wrapped themselves in blankets, unwilling to let the temperature drive them inside. They talked about everything and nothing, the way couples do when they have found their way back to each other. David told Margaret something he had never told her before. He said that a few months ago, before any of this started, he had been feeling like their marriage was fading away. Not dramatically, not with fights or affairs, just slowly dimming like a light with a failing battery. He had accepted it as inevitable, the price of growing older together. But now, he said, he felt more connected to her than he had on their wedding day. He felt like they were just beginning, like the best years were still ahead of them. Margaret reached for his hand in the darkness. She told him about a passage in Wattles that had stayed with her, something about how when you align yourself with the creative force of the universe, everything in your life begins to harmonize. Your relationships improve, your health improves, your work improves, not because you are trying to fix each thing separately, but because you have fixed the fundamental thing, the pattern of thought from which everything else flows. She said she didn't fully understand how it worked, this mysterious connection between thought and reality. Maybe no one did. But she knew that it worked, because she had experienced it. Her life was proof. Their marriage was proof. Everything that had happened in the past 30 days was proof that something real was operating in the universe, something that responded to human thought and intention, something that wanted to help people flourish if they would only learn to work with it instead of against it. They sat in silence for a while after that, just being together, feeling the enormity of what had shifted. A month ago, they had been two people going through the motions of a marriage. Now they were partners in something much larger, co-creators of a life they were designing together. Before they went inside, Margaret looked up at the sky one more time. She thought about Wallace D. Wattles, the man who had written those words over 114 years ago. He had spent his whole life trying to understand the laws of success, distilling his insights into a slim volume that would outlive him by more than a century. He could never have known who would read his words, whose lives would be changed, what ripples would spread out from that single stone he dropped into the water. Margaret made a silent promise to him, to her grandmother, to herself. She would not let this end with her. She would share what she had learned. She would pass the book along, just as it had been passed to her. She would add her link to the chain that stretched back through generations and forward into a future she could not imagine. The next morning, Margaret woke with a new sense of purpose. The 30-day experiment was over, but her life was just beginning. She made her coffee, sat in her usual spot, and opened the book again. Not because she had to, not because she was counting days anymore, but because she wanted to. Because these words had become her companions, her guides, her daily reminder of what was possible when you aligned your mind with the creative force of the universe. She read slowly, savoring each paragraph, finding new meaning in familiar passages. And when she finished, she closed the book gently and sat in the morning silence, feeling grateful for everything that had led her to this moment. The struggles, the gray years, the basement full of boxes, the grandmother she barely remembered, the desperate decision to try something new. All of it had been necessary. All of it had brought her here. She was not the same woman who had knelt on that cold basement floor just 1 month ago. She was someone new, someone she was still getting to know, someone with a future as bright and limitless as her willingness to believe in it. The book of Wallace D. Wattles, that slim volume from 1910, sat on her table like a key to another world, and the door, once opened, could never be closed again. If you are listening to this story and feeling something stir inside you, pay attention to that feeling. It might be recognition. It might be the same spark that ignited in Margaret when she read those first pages in her basement. It might be the universe tapping you on the shoulder, telling you that you are ready. The principles in the science of getting rich are as true today as they were 114 years ago. They have transformed countless lives, mostly in secret, passed from person to person like a precious heirloom. And they can transform your life too, if you are willing to commit, to practice, to persist through the doubt and fear and resistance that will inevitably arise. If this story has touched you, if you feel even a glimmer of the hope that Margaret felt, then consider this your invitation. Find the book. Read it again. Read it every day for 30 days and watch what happens. You might be surprised. You might be amazed. You might find yourself 1 month from now living a life you cannot currently imagine. And when that happens, when the transformation takes hold and your world begins to shift, remember to share what you have learned. Pass it along. Add your link to the chain. Because this is how the principles spread, person to person, story to story, life to life. This is how the light grows brighter. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring these ideas together. Leave a comment below sharing your own experience with these principles, or telling us what resonated most with this story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. They might be the spark that ignites another transformation. And remember, always remember that the universe is on your side. It wants you to succeed. It wants you to flourish. It is constantly moving toward more life, more abundance, more good. Your only job is to align yourself with that movement, to think in the certain way, to act in the certain way, and to trust that everything you desire is already making its way toward you. The book is waiting. The principles are waiting. Your new life is waiting. The only question is whether you are ready to begin.